Kaikeyi, Chapter 14. Thanks to Ravana's incredible gift, the whole world opened up to me in a burst of color. I learned how to view all of the binding plane at once and lost myself for hours in the brilliant webs. Thin skeins of orange and red created tracks of fire around the palace, while threads of blues and greens sent beautiful rivers through every part of the court. Against the faded grey hues my surroundings took on when I entered the binding plane. The bonds and connections stood out ever more brightly. The plane had its own landscape, and I came to feel like its god. But one problem remained that couldn't be solved with the binding plane. As the weeks went by and I went again and again to my husband's bed, my moon cycle did not change. Every moon I bled, and every moon I failed to produce an heir. In the privacy of my own room, I worried over the many possibilities for my childlessness. My occasional evening horseback rides, my work in the binding plane, my divine abandonment. Hardest to bear was the disappointment of Kaushalya and Sumitra. Kaushalya, especially, had given up on the idea that she would ever bear the Raja a child, and I had come to consider her a true friend. Letting her down filled me with such shame and sadness at causing her such pain. Despite all my maneuverings in becoming Dasharath's bride, I was now a worthless third queen. When Dasharath summoned me to his chambers nearly 15 moons after my move to Ayodhya, I delayed as long as possible. Just the idea of trying again twisted my insides. Mantra forced me out the door, reminding me that no matter how I felt about it, Dasharath was my Raja and I had to obey. My treacherous feet bore me forward even as my mind protested, and I stood outside his rooms considering for a fleeting moment using my influence over Dasharath to make him forget his desires. Finally, I lifted my hand to knock. The door swung open. Before I even touched it, and Sumitra's cheerful face peered out at me. I blinked. Did Dasharath now want two of us at a time? Here she is. No need to send a servant out to find her, Sumitra said, beckoning me inside. I followed her through the chambers. Good. Dasharath sat on the edge of his bed and Kaushalya sat on the floor by his feet. Sumitra knelt beside her, and I forced myself to assume the same submissive posture. At least it seemed that I would not be expected to perform any conjugal acts tonight. I believe there is a reason why all of your wombs have failed to bear a child, Dasharath said. He spoke quickly as though he did not like the words. That reason is me. I nearly toppled into Sumitra, trying to hide my surprise. Men never took responsibility for infertility. That was a woman's curse. I have not performed the proper rituals for the gods. I have been too preoccupied with expanding our territories and administering to the needs of the kingdom, and so neglected my spiritual role. This kingdom has not had a yagna in a generation. The gods are punishing me by withholding an heir. Ah, that made more sense. How will we rectify this, Raja? Kaushalya murmured. I have arranged to perform a great yagna in a fortnight. We will sacrifice our best animals, offer our best foods, and pray for a child. Sumitra clapped her hands together, but I had her measure well enough by then to know, without checking, that she only feigned enthusiasm. She believed herself fully barren, despite evidence it might be Dasharath's fault. What should we do to prepare? She asked. I have consulted the city's sages. They tell me there are purification rituals you must undertake. Our court sage will instruct you, and you must fast for the next fortnight. Despite knowing such rituals were unlikely to work for me, I was willing to try, not only for myself and my kingdom, but for the promise Dasharath had made me in my father's throne room. And so I forced myself to observe every preparation for the yagna. I fasted for 2 weeks, subsisting on water and the occasional fruit, hiding my irritation that Dasharath as a man was allowed to eat freely. It was another inequality that I had been ignorant of. How many poor women had undergone similar ritual, forced to go about their days with only a few sips of water? How many were forced to fast during their cycle? It was a small indignity, not as bad as the laws that prohibited women from speaking in public or forced illegitimate daughters into a life of poverty, but it rankled me. By the day of the yagna, none of us could contain our irritation. Dasharath had promised us an enormous feast afterward, but that seemed so far away when servants woke us before dawn to bathe. Sage Rishya Sringa, better move quickly, Sumitra griped as we began dressing. Her usually sunny disposition had fully faded in the face of the court's sage's potential long windedness. I might eat whatever animals they sacrifice, Kaushalya added, pulling on her shift with more force than strictly necessary. I groaned. I might eat sage Rishya Sringa himself. They both stared at me, and I thought I had gone too far, but then the room echoed with peals of laughter. Not nearly meaty enough, Sumitra joked. Well, he has those horns and a little tail. Perhaps he would taste like goat meat, Kaushalya said, her voice remarkably even for someone speaking so ludicrously. It was common knowledge among the court that Rishya Saringa's mother had been an apsara, a dancing spirit in the court of the gods, who had been cursed to live in the form of a deer. The gods liked to remind apsaras of their place lest they get too arrogant in their beauty. Brahma had fashioned Ahalya to humble the apsaras too. Born of a human father and a divine deer, Rishya Sringa was a renowned sage, even if he took after his mother in some respects. Just a few more hours. When the sun sets, we can eat. My stomach rumbled agreement. You know what I want? Sumitra asked. Kheer. I want kheer. I made a fake gagging sound. I hate kheer. I don't even think, even now, I'm hungry enough to eat it. It's so grainy. Kaushalya flicked my shoulder. If you can eat sage, you can eat kheer. I wouldn't be so sure, I said, but there will be many other desserts at the feast. Gulab jamun, I could eat 100 of those. The delicious fried dough soaked in rose flavored sugar syrup had been my favorite dessert for as long as I could remember. Only if there's 100 for me too, Kaushalya said. Otherwise, I'll fight you for them. I laughed. You would lose. Would I? Kaushalya asked, voice cool, and I worried again that hunger had loosened my tongue overmuch. Then Kaushalya dissolved into a fit of giggles. The hunger had turned us all hysterical. We struggled to dress ourselves. When our handmaidens entered the preparation rooms, the sun had barely risen over the horizon. Their deft fingers undid and redid our clothes, fastened jewelry. Asha snuck each of us a small peach, and despite the fact that we were not supposed to eat until the feast, we devoured them as they were the choicest dish in the entire kingdom. That just made me hungrier, I groaned. When no one was looking, I quickly licked a drop of juice from my finger. Asha only grinned at me. You're welcome. She acted far more familiar toward me than a servant normally would. She had become a friend, and a thick braid of green between us proved that. A sudden pang of sorrow shot through me, for the way she treated me made me think of Yudhajit. I missed him dearly. He had been wrong to send me away, even if he had been right about my life in Ayodhya. I might have swallowed my pride and apologized for the chance to get my brother back. But the door was closed and the bond broken. I walked to the yagna, shivering in the cool morning air. We had all been dressed in plain yellow cotton saris that did little to warm our bodies. Risha, Rishyasringa lit the sacred fire, and despite the smoke, I was grateful for the beacon of warmth before me. Much of the ceremony passed in a fog of sadness and hunger and exhaustion. The sage would intone prayers and instruct Dasharath to repeat holy words after him. Every so often, we would be instructed to sprinkle water into the fire and speak a mantra or make offerings of flowers or fruits to the flames. The sage scraped ashes from the fire and used his thumb to apply them to our foreheads, marking us as Dasharath's wives. At his command, we rose to our feet and completed three pradakshinas, circling the statues of the gods and the flames while we repeated any sinful acts of our past. I thought of Neeti, how I had so foolishly lost her friendship. I thought of Yutajit, how even though he had been at fault, my cruelty had sealed our fate. And even though I had not forced her away, my mother's face flashed before me. I had lost so many people. I walked around the flame in a daze, not looking up from my own feet. My mind felt hazy, half removed from the world. Perhaps that is why I did not notice anything amiss until Sumitra shrieked my name, her hand pulling me back. I stumbled, not quite reaching her, and felt at the back an all consuming heat. Never take your eyes off. I spun around towards the sacred fire, but it was gone, replaced by a column of pure flame towering above me. Before I could move from the radius of destruction, a male form coalesced out of the blaze. He stepped forward, eyes falling immediately on me. Despite the heat, a shiver ran down my spine. I recognized him. Agni, the god of fire. His hair and eyes were molten gold, his skin a searing red. Bright light fell off him as though he was the sun. He towered over me, taller even than the half Rakshasa Ravana had been. Why do you not bow before me? He asked, voice crackling. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw that all the others, even Dasharath, had dropped to their knees. I do not know, I answered. My lips were incapable of forming a lie. Raw power came from him in waves. Kaikeyi, he intoned, each syllable like the strike of a gong in my head. He approached me and placed a single finger under my chin. Instant pain rose where he touched me. He tilted my face up towards his, and I fought down a scream at the unbearable heat. Instead, I made myself look into his burning golden eyes. I would not show the god's weakness, no matter how they hurt me. His lips quirked upwards into a smirk. Radni Kaikeyi, we have expected you. I blinked at that. Expected me? I echoed, jerking my chin from his grasp. Cool relief. You think we ignore you for our amusement? He asked, voice a whisper. There is a reason. Why? I demanded. What have I done? I hated that I needed so badly to know. It's not what you have done, he said. All mirth had left him. It is what you will do. What will I do? I asked. Tell me and let me be done with it. Behind me, I could sense the quiet murmurs of the watching crowd. Half of Ayodhya had turned out to witness the spectacle of the yagna, and now they watched as Agni singled out the third wife of the Raja. How would I explain this to Dasharath, to the others? I cannot tell you that, he said, but the gods touched are immune to the charms of the gods. Forsaken, you are forsaken. He brushed past me then and strode purposefully towards Dasharath. God's touch, I called after him. What does that mean? But he had already forgotten me, turning instead to the Raja. In the god's hands appeared a small silver pot, and Dasharath was nodding, smiling, prostrating himself to touch Agni's feet. I managed to gain enough control over myself to find the binding plane. I did not know why, but my instinct in this frightening situation was to flee there, to a place where I had power. Grey overlaid the world, and I searched for Agni, hoping to demand answers. He was not there. In the binding plate, even his shadow had disappeared. The place in front of me stood empty, and I reached out a hand, hoping to touch the blank spot where I knew a god should stand. But there was nothing. Feed this kheer to your three wives, Agni rumbled, and I jerked my hand back, exiting the plane to see Agni still standing by Dasharath. I blinked the magical threads back into existence, and once again the god disappeared. Once they have consumed it, Agni continued, they will bear you strong sons. His voice had amplified so the whole crowd could hear him, perhaps the whole city. Thank you, my lord, Dasharath said. We are unworthy of your blessing. Agni stepped back and back into the fountain of fire, and the flames rose up around him, consuming him well into the consuming him until he was indistinguishable from the towering blaze. In the blink of an eye, the fire died down to its normal mortal size. I raised my hand to my chin, expecting to feel a blistering burn, but my fingers met only smooth skin. What did he say to you? Sumitra whispered, coming to stand beside me. Kaushalya stood on Sumitra's other side. He wanted to know why I had dared not to bow, I whispered back. I apologized. I explained that the hunger had made me faint and I was not in my right mind. What did you shout after him? I was begging forgiveness, I said. My explanation was flimsy, so I gave our connection a quick strum. If you begged for forgiveness, he granted it. Put that out of your mind. The gods are not cruel. Sumitra straightened as Dasharath approached Kaushalya with the kheer. I reached for her hand and squeezed it, trying to thank her. She squeezed back. Kaushalya lifted the kheer to her lips and drank long and deep. As Kaushalya's throat bobbed, my stomach rolled. I really did despise kheer. It tasted sweetly sweet, like fruit that was several days overripe. It was only sweet I could not stomach. Even in this, the gods mocked me. Kaushalya finished drinking and passed the vessel to Sumitra. Sumitra took several swallows and then handed the vessel to me. I looked into the silver pot, and the sight of the creamy rice pudding made my empty stomach turn. I lifted it to my lips, held my breath, and took two fast swallows. When I paused to breathe, the thick coating on my tongue choked me. I could not make myself drink again. I passed the vessel back to Sumitra. I don't wish to take more than my due, I gasped out. Perhaps the others would view it as generosity and humility rather than simply a deep hatred of Kheer. I watched Sumitra struggle and could tell the moment that hunger and a desire to be out of the intense scrutiny of the public won out. She gulped down all that remained. Dasharath raised the empty pot up to show the crowd. It is done! The kheer churned in my belly. I focused on breathing in, out, in, out. Soon we would be in the palace. Soon we would be at the feast. Soon, soon, soon. So that's the end of chapter 14. Um, in this chapter, I think it's quite obvious how attached the three wives are, which is really nice to see. There's no competitiveness between the three of them. They are all going to bear sons at the same time. And I love the description of Agni, the god of fire, how he appears with as a column of fire with blazing eyes and touch that scorches. I found that very interesting.